All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're setting off on an absolute epic of a historical journey. We're looking at a story of immense power, just unimaginable riches, and a pilgrimage that quite literally changed the map of the medieval world. We're talking about the medieval empire of Mali and its most famous ruler, Mansa Musa.
18 tons. Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. When Mansa Musa arrived in the great city of Cairo, Egypt, during his pilgrimage to Mecca, historical accounts suggest he brought with him a staggering 18 tons of gold. This wasn't just some humble religious journey. This was a flex. It was a display of wealth on a scale the medieval world had barely ever comprehended.
And you don't just pack 18 tons of gold in your luggage, right? Several accounts suggest he arrived in Cairo with a traveling entourage of over 15,000 people. Let that sink in. According to one specific account, 500 of Mansa Musa's enslaved people each carried their own golden staff. But here's the really staggering part. Historian Michael Gomez actually points out that acquiring this massive number of enslaved people meant the Empire of Mali would have had to spend years fighting neighboring groups, taking captives from their victories, literally just to prepare for this one single journey.
So what do you think happens when you introduce 18 tons of gold into a single city's economy? Well, you completely crash it. During his stay in Cairo, which, keep in mind, was one of the world's most important and bustling cities at the time, Mansa Musa spent and gifted so much gold that he single-handedly caused a massive crash in the Egyptian gold market. And we're not talking about a brief little dip here. The value of gold stayed depressed for years just because he completely flooded the market. The famous Catalan Atlas from 1375 perfectly captures how the outside world saw this guy. Mapmakers in Europe and the Mediterranean literally defined him by his wealth. In it, he's depicted sitting on a throne as the king of Mali, holding up this massive gold coin. I mean, that was his brand. But obviously, this raises a huge question. How exactly did he get so incredibly rich in the first place?
Let's look at the engine of his empire, the gold and salt trade.
The vast wealth of Mali, and actually kingdoms like Ghana and Songhai before and after it, basically came down to one highly lucrative exchange: gold for salt. You had West African gold, mined from super-rich gold fields like Bure and Bambouk, being traded for Saharan salt, which was mined in these incredibly harsh desert locations like Tagaza. Between the years 1000 and 1450, Arab and Berber merchants traveled across the Sahara. They brought salt, which was absolutely vital for preserving food and maintaining health, and they traded it for that West African gold. Mali was just perfectly positioned right at the nexus of this enormously profitable network.
But actually getting that wealth, that meant surviving the Sahara, which was a brutal crossing.
We actually have this gripping first-hand account from the famous medieval traveler Ibn Battuta. When he was describing his stop at that salt mining settlement of Tagaza, he wrote, "We spent 3 days there under strain, for the water is brackish and it is the place with most flies." He paints this gritty, just miserable picture. It was a completely essential stop to get water for the deep desert journey ahead, but man, it was rough.
And the reality of the actual crossing was literally deadly. After leaving Tahaza, Ibn Battuta describes this horrific stretch of 10 days' travel with rarely any water. They had to rely on these little pools left between rocks by the rain just to wash and quench their thirst. The stakes were absolute life and death. He chillingly recounts how men who just wandered off to pasture their animals would get utterly lost in the dunes. In one instance, they found a guy who had gotten separated from another caravan, just lying dead under a bush in the sand. Caravans eventually had to stop at places like Tisashrala, where there was underground water. They'd spend 3 full days there just resting, doing repairs, and desperately sewing these coarse bags over their water skins to protect them from the harsh desert winds.
Because the journey was so perilous, these caravans had to use some intense logistical strategies. And that brings us to the takshif. A takshif was basically a desert messenger, often a man from the Masufa tribe, hired by the caravan. His job? Unbelievably dangerous. He had to ride completely alone, way ahead of the main group, to the city of Walata. He carried letters begging the people there to journey 4 days back into the desert to meet the arriving caravan with life-saving water. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that the immense wealth of Mali was built entirely on the backs of people willing to risk everything to cross this brutal landscape.
Okay, let's jump forward to the Cairo standoff, a story of pure diplomacy and pride.
Now, the Hajj is an Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca that every able Muslim should carry out at least once. But historians kind of debate Musa's true motivations here. Like, was it purely religious commitment from a devoted follower of Islam? Was it a calculated PR stunt to flaunt his immense wealth to the rest of the world? Or was Musa just incredibly ambitious, looking to elevate Mali's geopolitical status on the global stage? As we look at his behavior in Cairo, I think you might decide it was a bit of all three.
So, while he's in Cairo, the local officials are eager to see this famous African king, and they try to bring him to the citadel to meet their sultan. An official named Abu actually recorded the whole event. Musa repeatedly refused to go, giving the excuse, "Hey, I came for the pilgrimage and nothing else." But Abu realized what was really going on. To meet the sultan meant following local protocol, which literally demanded that Musa kiss the ground in the sultan's hand. Musa absolutely hated this idea. I mean, he was an emperor in his own right. But Abu kept pressing him, and eventually Musa agreed to go. When he walked in, they ordered him kiss the ground. Musa flat out refused, asking, "How may this be?" Then, a really clever guy from Musa's entourage whispered something to him, and Musa found this brilliant diplomatic loophole. He declared loudly, "I pay respect to God who created me," and then bowed forward. This perfectly satisfied the requirement of the bow, but it directed his submission only to God, completely preserving his royal pride. The Sultan was actually so impressed by this that he half rose to greet him and seated Musa right by his side. They talked for a long time, and the Sultan sent him away with some incredible gifts.
So what was the actual legacy of Mali? Let's look at the ripples it sent across the world.
You see, this journey wasn't just a cool story about a rich guy traveling abroad. The exchanges along these trade networks brought a massive influx of Muslim merchants, religious teachers, and travelers right into West Africa, and the effects were completely transformative. West Africans converted to Islam and built magnificent mosques. Using their vast gold wealth, Mali started importing these powerful horses from North Africa, creating a formidable cavalry that massively strengthened their military. And perhaps most enduringly, West African Muslims established a massive university, or madrasa, at Timbuktu. Teachers and students there used Arabic to read and write, transmitting Islamic knowledge throughout West Africa, and even sending their own original scholarship back out into the global Islamic network.
Which brings us to our final thought. What does Mansa Musa's journey to Mecca actually reveal about medieval Mali? When you think about it, the 18 tons of gold, the thousands of people in his entourage, the unyielding pride before a foreign sultan, and that thriving university he helped foster, it reveals a highly organized, deeply ambitious, and just incredibly wealthy civilization sitting right at the very center of medieval global trade. The next time you think of the medieval world, I really hope you remember the king who was so rich